Thank you for joining us today on Team Right on the KRTD network. Here with us today we have Joe Evans, a Libertarian running for Congress in Idaho's 1st District.
So how are you doing, Dominic?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing excellent. So let's go ahead and what do you want to talk about today?
So I have a few questions for you. Some are personal, some about why you're running, etc.
Okay.
So we can just go down this list. All right. So the first question I have for you is, where'd you grow up?
I grew up here in Boise, Idaho, here in the Meridian area. So when I was growing up here, 50 years ago, 45 up until I graduated high school, an awful lot of the area where I lived in, even though I lived in a small suburb, it was farm country here. Right across the street, we just had a big dairy farm. It's now a golf course. My family owned 40 acres just up or my grandparents owned 40 acres just up the street. Autumn it was cornfields everywhere. And it's been real interesting watching this area of Idaho change over the last several years.
Yeah, I see. Very cool. All right. So I have another question for you. So
Okay.
What do you think inspired you the most?
Now that one's a tough one. My grandparents, both of my grandfathers inspired me an awful lot, especially with regards to their dedication to the land and the communities that they were involved in here in Meridian and southwestern Idaho. So there was a lot of that. And I had some really great teachers over the years that also helped as far as get me involved in civic engagement, taking a look at what was going on in our communities and helping. Even had a couple church elders over the years. I think that's probably more than anything else. That combination of teachers and church elders when I was, 13, 14, 15, during that time frame inspired me to get involved a lot in what was going on in our communities.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I have another question for you. So what was your first job?
My first job was actually working as a convenience store clerk for a stinker station just a mile down the road from where I worked. That was my first official job, of course. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs, so there was work that I'd occasionally do to support the business, support the plan, the whole easily exploitable family labor thing.
I see.
But yeah, so that was a combination. Yeah. Combination of that public sector job versus trying to do the family job, doing the family work, helping the family make things happen.
Got it. All right. So I have one more question for you for the personal side. So why did you join the Army?
At the time, I was kind of in a rather awkward situation as far as trying to understand where I fit. And, you reach a point where habits start to form in your relationship, start to form in your family. And those habits aren't always in your best interest. We talk about it all the time. We go out and we want to help family. We want to take care of family. But every so often, the amount of effort you put into trying to take care of them affects you and your well-being and your ability to continue to do the things that you felt important. So joining the Army was one of those opportunities that allowed me to step outside of my community and actually find myself, understand who I was, and make changes more on a global matter. When I joined the Army back in 1994, none of this current situation was what it was. We were still Cold War. We were still looking at missions like support in Germany, support in South Korea. We weren't really involved in too many of those small scale wars. We had a few that pop up every so often. A little trip down to Panama, a little trip over to Nicaragua. We'd have a brigade over in Somalia for about a year, but we didn't have any long-standing conflicts at the time. So my expectations when I first joined were completely different than what I ended up living later on.
So, like, what places do you tour in the Army?
Oh, this is a long list. So my stateside assignments included Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Fort Drum, New York, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas. I was at Monterey, Presidio of Monterey, California for about 2 years. Fort Lewis, Washington was another one. And these were my stateside assignments. I spent a year in Korea, of course, did about 6 months off and on in the Philippines, did 2.5 years worth of tours in Afghanistan, full year in Iraq. And then, of course, all of the other little places that you visit. I visited Panama for some training there, training in Hawaii, Alaska, several other locations, Georgia and Oklahoma for basic and AIT and airborne training. And then you make little stops along the way, like the Canary Islands, you stop in for an hour or two. Turkey, spend a couple days in Turkey waiting for deployment to go into Afghanistan. So it's like you're starting to develop a list of which countries I've been in, even for just the littlest bit of time. And I start to realize that I've seen more countries internationally than most of the kids I grew up have seen states. And it's an interesting dynamic when you're trying to talk to people about where you've been and what you've done. People go, well, what was it like? And it's like, well, they were people.
Well, let's see. That's a lot of places.
Yeah.
All right. So I have another question for you. Okay? So why are you running?
Well, see, this is an interesting thing because I am running as a libertarian, and initially the thing back in March. You remember March? How long ago was March?
It feels like a couple years ago.
Right? It feels like a couple years ago. But back in March when I was running, when I put my name in, the idea was, let's talk about the Liberty platform. Let's get the message out. Let's have people start thinking so that we can shift the message. Because a lot of people say, well, third party's not big. It's not going to influence, So back in March, I'm thinking, well, let's influence. Let's get people talking about liberty. And back in March, I wasn't really thinking about the rest of the year or what was going to happen or why I should start putting a lot of energy into my campaign or getting the message out on discussions like this, talking with interviewers like you, Dominic. But get out and take a look. And it was just about spreading the word, get the message out, get people started talking about liberty. And if I don't win, at least the two-party system will also start talking about liberty, which they are right now. You step back, Trump's made a couple claims about being, a libertarian president, which he isn't. Biden and some of the other candidates from the Democrat side have made appeals to the libertarian candidates or the libertarian voters, so we're getting the message out. We're making an impact. But the real thing we want to do is we want to be but ever since the lockdown started and we've watched what both Democrats and Republicans have done in response to it, and we go, that's not the way we run a nation. That's not the way we deal with a pandemic. We are compounding mistakes and adding them. And a lot of the libertarians, 9 months ago when we thought, okay, you know, we're going to run, we're going to throw our name, we're going to spread the message, we're going to preach life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to America and hopefully spark something. And it's like we got into it and then everything started going south. We went, no. We need to make it happen this year. We need to make liberty the platform, and libertarian candidates need to make office. Because if we continue down the same path that both the Democrats and Republicans have created in their different states, you know, we won't be able to recover from what happens to us this year or next.
Yes. All right. So, what are your policies?
Oh, yeah. So you always got a couple, but my first big one, of course, is global peace. You know, I want to bring our troops home. It's been my big policy since I ran 2 years ago, you know, since I got out of the Army, and I understood that the endless wars were going to be a big thing. So my big thing, bring our troops home, end the endless wars. That means a repeal of the authorization of use of military force, repeal of the Patriot Act, all of those things. So that one's been a big priority. The next thing that I talk about is legalization of medical marijuana. Now, as a libertarian, of course, my ultimate goal is decriminalization of everything. But, you know, the one thing I think we need more than anything right now for our service members that have been fighting these endless wars for the past 19 years now is give them access to medical marijuana, because medical marijuana works for post-traumatic stress injuries. You know, it helps them heal. It helps them regain their sense of self long enough to actually start the process of healing. So medical marijuana, and the fastest way to do that with regards to post-traumatic stress injury is get marijuana off the Schedule 1. You know, even if we just get it moved down to Schedule 2, we can use it for medicinal purposes, just like we do right now with the opiates. You know, all of our opiates are Schedule 2. You know, so make marijuana, move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, authorize CBD, medicinal marijuana, the THC, and then start healing. Then the next one, of course, is end the drug war. You know, the war on drugs, it's BS. It's been here for, what, since Nixon? Well, even before Nixon. You know, the first outlaw of drugs went clear back to San Francisco. It was making the opium dens illegal. You know, and we've just continued to build on that since then. And it's a waste of resources. It also puts people in prison for addiction, not crimes, but for addiction. And it also allows communities that have been over-policed to suffer the brunt of the war on drugs. So those are really my big three issues: bring our troops home, legalization of marijuana, and end the war on drugs. You know, you got a few other things you start to pick up along the way. I got a couple friends that are involved in the indigenous movement, the land back movement. So finding ways to help and facilitate that is a big one. Now I'm actually having to start to think now that I'm past my big three. But yeah, police reform, of course, is a big one. And that comes with end the war on drugs. You know, you end the war on drugs, and it's like half the jobs that the police do right now just disappear. You know, they're no longer responsible for policing drugs on the street. You know, they're no longer arresting people, you know, who are addicts. You know, those addicts can now continue to exist. If they're functional addicts, they continue to participate in society. If they're dysfunctional addicts, you know, get them help. You know, it's the same thing we got with alcoholics right now. We got people who continue to exist in the United States across the full spectrum that are functional alcoholics. Okay. Why? And as soon as they become dysfunctional with their alcoholism, we get them into programs, we get them into Alcohol Anonymous, AA, we get them into counseling, we get them into therapy, we get them into couples counseling, So why is it so hard to use that exact same treatment for the rest of the drugs that we currently use for alcohol rehabilitation? How you doing, Dominic?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Like, I agree with that 100%.
Awesome.
Like, for real. I always thought about that as well. Like, it really makes no sense. All right. So, I have another question for you. So, what is your stance on foreign policy?
So this actually goes back to the policies that are put out by Jo Jorgensen. A well-armed, neutral America. One giant Switzerland. Bring all of our troops home from all around the nations. We don't have an obligation to continue to protect them at this point. Germany has a strong enough infrastructure and economy, it can defend itself. Japan, same way. South Korea, same way. All of these countries have a strong enough economy that they don't need United States forces, United States service members in those countries shoring up, their defensive postures in other countries. So one of the things we got right now is we have troops in 150 nations around the world. There are only 190. So, right, we are in nearly 80%. We have troops stationed in 80% of the world right now. And you step back. So one of the comparisons is we actually go back and we talk about the English Empire, the British Empire. The sun never set on the British Empire. We are actually at that point right now with the United States. No matter what time of day it is, the sun is shining on a U.S. service member somewhere on the planet. Never sets on the U.S. ever. They're all wearing that flag on their shoulder. That sun is always shining on a U.S. flag somewhere on the planet today. And that represents an extreme waste of resources in my book. In order to maintain those troops in those countries, we have to maintain a supply chain. We have to send supplies over. We need to be able to have troops to replace them. So we're constantly moving people back and forth. All of those troops that are stationed overseas, they're separated from their families. So you have the expense that those families go through in order to maintain contact. You got one family member living in one location, and then you got another family member with kids living in another location. This just represents a ton of resources that just aren't being used effectively. So my foreign policy, much like Jo Jorgensen's foreign policy, is bring our troops home, get U.S. troops here in the United States, defending U.S. soil where they belong, and give self-determination back to all of those other countries where we're currently stationed.
Right, all right. So, what's your stance on prison reform?
Prison reform. And that's one of those issues because it goes back to the war on drugs. Okay, nonviolent crimes. Okay. This one always gets confusing because you got two different ways of looking at crime. You got nonviolent crime and you got victimless crime. And there are some victimless crimes that are, almost all victimless crimes are nonviolent. Nonviolent crimes sometimes have victims, but are victimless crimes. The ones like drug use, incidences where people are trading drugs, they're selling drugs. This is a mutual agreement. They're coming to. Those people shouldn't be in prison. That's my basic stance. You step back and you take a look at prison reform in the United States. If we were to go through the process, so Jo Jorgensen, she talks about releasing nearly 80,000 federal prisoners who are in federal prisons, mind you, federal prisons for drug-related offenses. These are victimless crimes. This was an agreement between two people. A sale was made. There was no victim. Or somebody had possession of something that somebody felt they shouldn't. Again, no victim. We shouldn't take on the responsibility of policing other people's behaviors or what they do with their own body. My body, my choice. It's a huge platform for the Libertarian Party: bodily autonomy, self-determination. We educate. We know drugs are bad, but making them illegal doesn't actually fix the problem. It's education. Education is what keeps people from becoming addicts. It's what keeps them from becoming dysfunctional within the society, not making it illegal. But right now, if you take a look at prison stats across the United States, roughly 20 to 25% of the U.S. prisoners across the United States are currently in on their first term, for a nonviolent crime, whether it was drug possession, drug sale, something along those lines. So ending the war on drugs, that's 25% that are out of prison, overnight. The governors could start pardoning them, commuting their sentences, and we can put them back in the economy, working, earning money, paying taxes, the whole 9 yards. The other thing is you take a look at another 40% of our prison population right now. That 40% are back in for probation violations related to drug use or drug sale. Not even the first, it's a violation of so they're right back in. So literally we could empty prisons to the tune of about half of our prison population across the United States could be emptied, opening up spaces, reducing the need for private prisons that are still being used in some states. Idaho continues to work with private prisons in other states, even though we don't allow private prisons to operate within the borders of Idaho. Several of our overflow are currently occupying private prisons in other states right now, like Texas. I believe we made some arrangements in Colorado. It's one of those things. If we can go in and we can end the war on drugs, that prison reform fixes itself. 50% of the population in the United States, they're out of prison. They're back on the economy. They were nonviolent when they went in. Hopefully they're still nonviolent when they come out. Right? But that's one of my big things about prison reform, and it goes right back to end the war on drugs.
Right. So what are your stances on healthcare?
Stance on healthcare is free the market. Right now, one of the problems we have with healthcare all across the United States is the combination of deals and contracts that have been worked out between insurance agencies, healthcare providers, and government institutions prevents us from having the transparency we need in healthcare in order to make it truly affordable. Nobody knows how much the healthcare costs when they go into the doctor. It's literally, they try and call up and set up an appointment and say, hey, how much is it going to cost for a wellness checkup when I come in? And the first question out of the receptionist is, who's your insurance company? Because literally the cost of it is based on the insurance company, who the insurance company is, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield, whether it's one of the others, they've all contracted their own price. They've all contracted what it is they are going to pay a healthcare provider with just about every healthcare provider in their network. And so that's one of those, we don't know what the price is going to be, which is why we pay an unreasonable premium for our insurance. And it's why they don't want to see us unless we have insurance, because that's the only way that guarantees they get paid, because they've contracted an obligatory minimum for uninsured people that the insurance company doesn't even pay that much. So literally, we need to go in and we need to remove all of those barriers to transparency in U.S. healthcare so that we can eliminate the fraud, waste, and abuse in the U.S. healthcare system. That's really where our big problem is. We can go in and regulate it all we want, but the thing is until we actually create transparency in American healthcare, we're going to continue to have an excessive amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that just continues to leach resources out of America and put it into the pockets of, privateers and pirates.
So, do you support free healthcare?
No, I do not support free healthcare. Okay, reason why is because it's not free. Taxes are going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it out of your pocket. You can be part of a single payer program. You can do an opt-in. You can do an opt-out. There's a couple different ways to go in and do this, but the thing is, it's never free.
Yeah.
Someone has to pay for it. So the question is how do you come down to an agreement on who pays for what? That's where we get into the discussion with individuals like Joe Biden, who are talking about, you can keep your healthcare provider, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your insurance plan. Where you got Bernie also talking about, a single payer program. Well, if there's a single payer program, everybody, every physician, every hospital pays the exact same amount. But if you create a single payer, that's a monopoly. Monopolies are non-competitive, which means they set their own prices. So it's one of those situations where exactly how do we go in and set things up? Are we going to do a truly libertarian free market perspective? Are we going to allow individual states to set up their own policies? But I don't ever want to say I'm in support of free, because it isn't. Somebody's got to pay for it. And my opinion is the federal government has no role in managing healthcare. That's a community-based decision. Is the community going to support it? Do you have a community hospital that you've built that's funded by town money, by town taxes, by the community? The second you start getting the federal government involved, now we have communities in Southern California that are paying for hospitals in Montana. And it's like, how does somebody in Washington, D.C. understand what the health needs are of rural Montana, and why are they using funding from California to pay for it?
Yeah.
So it's one of those, we really need to get that decision back down to the communities. Do we want community hospitals? Does a city want one? Can they get away with a smaller one? We got several small community clinics all across Idaho, with actually we got about 4 major hospitals in the major metro areas right now. That is not a decision at the federal level. It shouldn't be, because they're going to get it wrong. But as far as getting it down to the states, I definitely think the states, much like Massachusetts did at one point, they need to come up with a solution. Do they want to run multiple insurance companies? Do they want to go to a single payer plan? As a state, do they want to dictate how, healthcare is ran? Do they want to run it as a state-ran monopoly, much like the VA care does? Or do they want to continue to support free markets? My position, though, is right now the federal government does not have a responsibility to make an overarching decision in that.
All right. So, what's your stance on qualified immunity?
Qualified immunity absolutely has to go. It's one of those that's created a severe problem all across the United States, especially with regards to over-policing communities. We have police officers in several states that have been caught lying, committing perjury, using excessive force. They continue to do this again and again and again, and they continue to be let loose because of the qualified immunity issue. They know they're breaking the law. You know, they are violating human rights through their actions and the things they do. So when you step back and you go, well, how do we fix that particular issue? Well, you get rid of qualified immunity and you make them stand trial when they break the law in the name of enforcing the law. You know, and that goes back to police reform, prison sentencing reform. You know, we end the war on drugs. Okay, back in, what was it, 1925, 1930, when we repealed alcohol prohibition. Nearly 50% of law enforcement positions were dissolved. You know, we no longer needed people enforcing alcohol prohibitions. So the number of people that we hired to be police officers reduced by nearly 50%. So we go in, we end the war on drugs. We reduce the number of police officers we need by 50%. Okay, that allows us to pay the ones that are left better. We can afford to train them better. We can afford to equip them better for dealing with the specific issues that they need to deal with. You know, and that includes, you know, a 2-year degree as a social worker in addition to the police academy training, you know, all these other things, so that they come out better prepared for interaction with the community and they live in the communities they work in. So the police reform and the war on drugs, we fix that issue. We can afford to maintain a higher quality police force across the United States. And that's what we should be looking for right now. We have police unions, the Fraternal Order of Police right now, that are insisting on maintaining this high operation tempo of police by maintaining high criminality, maintaining the war on drugs. All of this requires a high police force presence. And the rate, you know, the rate at which they bring police in and they leave because the police aren't, or the trainees aren't actually prepared to do the things that are expected of them. You know, the turnover rate for police early in is fairly high. So we reduce the number of police we need. We maintain a better quality. We maintain better training. We maintain better mental health care for the police officers that we retain. So definitely qualified immunity has to go, but we fix that by better training of our police officers.
So I have one final question for you, and it's related to, so do you support Justin Amash's bill?
Which bill again?
For qualified immunity.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I support Justin Amash's bill for qualified immunity. The qualified immunity, and that's one of those things that's ironic. Reason why is because qualified immunity was an imagination of the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay, it was never a law per se. It was something that was created to defend the police, and it was created by the Supreme Court. It wasn't actually created via legislation. So Justin Amash actually going in and saying, you know what, let's go ahead and clear this up. There is no law of the land creating qualified immunity. And he's going to do that by making a law of the land that specifically states qualified immunity is not something that is authorized. And at this point, it's going to be interesting to see exactly how it plays in as we go on, but we definitely need to make sure that it is recognized. Qualified immunity is not something that the defenders of the Republic are entitled to.
All right, so where can people find out more about your campaign?
We got several different places. One is my website. It's www.Idaho Joe for Congress. That's Idaho Joe for the number 4 Congress .org. And we also have my Twitter account, which is ID Joe for Congress. My Instagram account, also ID Joe for Congress. You can look up my webpage or my Facebook page. I got Idaho Joe Facebook.com/Idaho Joe. Also, Idaho Joe for Congress. And of course, I got a YouTube channel. I don't have quite enough followers that I can make it a distinct, but it can be found fairly easily. So quick Google search will show up an awful lot of information on me if all else fails, but definitely I got a significant amount on my platform, and I'm always available for questions.
All right, got it. All right, well, that about wraps things up. Thank you for joining me on Team Right, and you have a nice day.
Thank you, Dominic. You have an amazing day too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh,